She delivered alone in that hospital room until the door opened and everything changed. The contractions had been coming every 4 minutes for the past hour, and Claire Whitmore was alone. Not alone the way people say when they mean lonely. Alone the way a person stands at the edge of something enormous with no hand to reach for. No voice to say, "I'm here, I've got you." The fluorescent lights above her hospital bed hummed their indifferent song. A monitor beeped steadily, tracking 2 heartbeats on hers, and the one she had been carrying for 9 months, the one she had talked to in the dark, the one she had made promises to that she intended to keep no matter what it cost her. Somewhere down the hall a baby cried. Someone else's miracle, someone else's joy. Claire closed her eyes and breathed through the pain the way the YouTube videos had taught her, in through the nose, slow and deliberate, out through the mouth. She had watched those videos alone, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her studio apartment in Cincinnati with her laptop balanced on a pregnancy pillow because her back hurt too much to sit at the desk. She had taken the prenatal vitamins alone. She had driven herself to every single appointment alone, parked in the hospital garage alone, sat in waiting rooms surrounded by couples who held hands and whispered to each other while she scrolled her phone and pretended she was fine. She was 29 years old. It had been 7 months since Daniel had packed his things into 2 duffel bags and stood in the doorway of the apartment. They had shared for 2 years and said the words that still lived somewhere beneath her sternum, pressing against her rib cage at unexpected moments, in the grocery store, in the shower, at 3 a.m. when sleep refused to come. "I'm not ready for this, Claire. I'm sorry. I'm not ready." She had not begged. She had not thrown things. She had stood very still in the kitchen, with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold, and she had nodded once, and she had listened to the sound of his footsteps going down the stairs and the front door closing and his car pulling away from the curb, and then she had sat down on the kitchen floor and cried until there was nothing left. And then she had gotten back up, because there was no one else to do it. She had not called her mother tonight. Her mother would have come, and of course she would have. She was her mother, but she also would have filled every silence with the particular brand of love that arrives wrapped in the words, "I warned you and I only want what's best for you." Claire was not strong enough for that tonight. Tonight she needed something her mother didn't know how to give. She had called no one. She had driven herself to the hospital at 9 in the evening. When the contractions became regular, checked herself in at the front desk with her insurance card and her overnight bag, and followed the nurse down the long corridor to room 114. With the particular focused calm of a woman who has learned to save her falling apart for later. The room was standard, beige walls, a reclining chair in the corner that no one was sitting in, a whiteboard with her nurse's name written in blue marker, Donna, and a small window that looked out onto the parking garage. Claire had arranged her things carefully. Chapstick on the bedside table, phone charger plugged in, the small stuffed elephant she had bought at a garage sale 2 months ago, because something about it had made her think of her daughter, already placed in the corner of the bassinet that sat waiting beside the bed. She had known for weeks it was a girl. She had not told Daniel. By the time she found out, there was nothing left between them worth telling. The hours moved strangely in labor, time compressed and stretched without logic. A contraction would grip her, and the whole world, narrowed to that single point of intensity, and then it would release, and for a few minutes she would float in something almost like calm, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting the small imperfections in the plaster. Donna came and went, checking monitors, adjusting things, offering professional reassurances, in the tone of someone who had said the same words 10,000 times. Claire appreciated the competence. She did not find it comforting. At some point she turned off the overhead lights and lay in the dim glow of the monitor screens and let herself think about what she was about to do. Not the labor. She was already doing that, one breath at a time. She let herself think about what came after. The drive home with an infant strapped into the car seat she had installed herself after watching 3 tutorial videos. The first night, the first week, the pediatric appointments and the sleepless stretches in every moment that was supposed to be shared and would not be. She was not afraid exactly. She was something more complicated than afraid. She was standing at the edge of the biggest thing she had ever done and feeling, acutely, the specific weight of doing it without a witness. The nurse who pushed open the door at 11:47 p.m. was not Donna. This one was different, older, maybe 50, with silver threading through dark hair pulled back simply, and the kind of steady hands that suggested she had seen everything this work had to offer and remained unshaken by all of it. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long since stopped performing competence and simply embodied it. Her name badge said Margaret. She checked the monitors first, made a note on her tablet, then looked at Claire, really looked at her, in a way that Donna hadn't. Not assessing, seeing. "How are you doing in here?" Claire laughed, which surprised her. It came out raw and a little broken, like something that had been held under pressure for too long. "Define okay." Margaret smiled, not the practiced, clinical smile Claire had been receiving all evening. A real one, with the particular warmth of someone who has earned the right to it through years of sitting with people in their hardest moments. She pulled the rolling stool to the bedside and sat down without being asked, settling in with the ease that said she had nowhere else to be, as if Claire's room, at midnight on a Tuesday, was exactly where she was supposed to be. "First baby?" "First everything," Claire said. "First time doing anything this big completely by myself." Margaret nodded slowly, not the nod of someone waiting for their turn to speak, the nod of someone actually taking in what they've heard. "Who do you wish was here?" she asked quietly, without judgment. The question blindsided Claire completely. Her throat tightened. She looked at the ceiling and let herself do what she hadn't allowed herself to do in months. She thought about Daniel. Not the man who had stood in the doorway with the duffel bags. The man before that. The man she had fallen in love with 3 years ago at a rooftop party in Columbus, who had spent 2 hours talking to her about music and grief and what it meant to build a life that actually meant something. The man who used to bring her coffee before she was awake and leave notes on the bathroom mirror in blue marker that never quite came off, no matter how many times she wiped it. The man who had held her hand at her grandfather's funeral and said nothing, because he had understood that nothing was exactly what she needed. She missed that man with a grief that was entirely separate from anger. "Someone who chose to stay," she finally said. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I raised 2 boys alone. My husband died when they were 4 and 6. Cardiac arrest. He was 41 years old and perfectly healthy as far as any of us knew." Claire looked at her. "I spent the first year waiting for someone to come fix it," Margaret continued. "Waiting for my mother, or his mother, or some version of my life that made sense. And one day I realized the waiting was the thing that was breaking me, not the being alone. The waiting to stop being alone." She paused. "You already have everything you need. You just don't know it yet because you haven't had to use it." Claire didn't say anything. She pressed her lips together and nodded and felt something shift. Very quietly, in the architecture of how she was holding herself together. The labor lasted 4 more hours. Margaret stayed for all of it. She wasn't supposed to. Claire could tell from the way other nurses glanced in through the small window in the door. The way someone came to the threshold once and Margaret said something low and calm and the person retreated. She held Claire's hand during the contractions that crested beyond what breathing could manage. She talked when talking helped, and she was silent when the room needed silence, and she had the rare and invaluable gift of knowing the difference without being told. At 3:54 in the morning, Claire's daughter came into the world. The sound she made and that first cry, furious and absolute and utterly alive, that detonated somewhere below thought, below language in some chamber of Claire's self she had never accessed before. She was crying before she understood she was crying, tears running into her hair and her pillow, her whole body shaking with something that was not grief at all, though it was large enough to be. It was something older and stranger and fiercer than grief. It was the feeling of having come through. "She's beautiful," Margaret said softly, and placed the baby against Claire's chest. Claire looked down at this small, impossible person, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, dark faint hair, face still scrunched against the newness of everything, and felt the studio apartment, the duffel bags, the YouTube videos, the empty recliner in the corner, all of it rearrange itself into a shape she could carry, not disappear, rearrange, into something that had led here, to this exact moment, to this weight in her arms that was the realest thing she had ever held. She named her Eleanor, after her grandmother, who had crossed an ocean, alone at 22 and built something from nothing on the other side, after every woman who had ever stood in a hard place and decided to stay standing. 3 days later, she was still in the hospital when the knock came. She had been awake since 5. Eleanor was sleeping in the bassinet, small and perfect. Morning light, coming pale and clean through the blinds and laying itself across the floor in long, quiet rectangles. Claire had been sitting with a cup of terrible hospital coffee, watching her daughter breathe with the focused attention of someone who cannot quite believe what they are looking at. The knock was soft, uncertain, not a nurse's knock, which was always brisk and preceded by a half-second. This knock asked permission. She said, "Come in." Daniel stood in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was wearing the gray jacket she had always loved, the one with the worn collar that he'd had since before she met him, and he was holding a paper bag from the bakery on Vine Street, the one they used to walk to on Sunday mornings, the one that smelled like cinnamon and warm bread. He wasn't smiling. His eyes went immediately to the bassinet, and something moved across his face that Claire had no single name for, something that looked like a man being made to understand, at full scale, the weight of a choice he had made. "I heard," he said. His voice was unsteady. "Your friend Jess, she thought I should know." Claire said nothing. He stepped inside but stopped well short of the bed, as if there were a line on the floor he wasn't sure he had the right to cross. "I know I don't have any right to be here. I know that. I'm not here to ask for anything, Claire. I'm not here to make a speech or explain myself or tell you I've changed." He stopped, swallowed. "I just needed to see that you were okay. Both of you." She looked at him for a long time. The man she had loved, the man who had left, the man who was standing in a hospital doorway at 7 in the morning with a paper bag of pastries and no script and no guarantee of anything. "Her name is Eleanor," Claire said. Something in his face broke open. He pressed his lips together and nodded, and she could see him working to hold himself together. And she felt, not forgiveness, not yet. Not anything so clean and complete as that, but something, the faint outline of a door that was not yet open and might never fully open, and was at least no longer welded shut. He stayed for 2 hours. He sat in the recliner in the corner, the one that had been empty for 3 days, and he was quiet and careful and present in a way that cost him something. She could tell. He didn't ask to hold Eleanor. She didn't offer. But when Eleanor woke and fussed and Claire lifted her and settled, her and the room filled with the small sounds of a new life finding its rhythm, Daniel leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and watched, with an expression that was trying, visibly and imperfectly, to comprehend the full scale of what he had nearly walked away from forever. At the door before he left, he stopped. "I have a lot to prove," he said. "I know I might have already run out of chances, but I need you to know I'm done running." Claire looked at her daughter, then back at him. She thought about Margaret, sitting on that rolling stool at midnight, asking the question that no one else had thought to ask. She thought about Eleanor, her grandmother, crossing an ocean at 22 with nothing but herself. She thought about what she had done in this room, in these 4 walls, at 3:54 in the morning with no one's hand to hold but her own. "That's not a promise you make to me," she said finally. "That's a promise you make to her, and it won't be words that count. It'll be every ordinary day after this one." He nodded, slowly, like a man who had finally understood something he should have understood a long time ago, like a man who was perhaps for the first time in his life willing to be measured not by his intentions but by his presence. He left. Claire lifted Eleanor and held her against her chest, her daughter's small, perfect weight settling against her heartbeat, as if she had always known exactly where to find it. Outside the window, Cincinnati was waking up. Traffic sounds drifted up from the street below. Somewhere a horn, The distant rhythm of a city that did not pause for anyone's private reckoning, that kept moving through every loss and every arrival with complete indifference, and then somehow, that indifference was a comfort. The world did not stop. You kept going inside it. That was the whole of it. Claire Whitmore had come into this hospital alone. She was leaving it as someone's mother, someone's everything, the sole author of a life that was only just beginning to be written. She pressed her lips to Eleanor's forehead. Whatever came next, with Daniel, without him, through all the beautiful and impossible terrain of what lay ahead, she would not spend one more day waiting to be rescued. She had already saved herself, and that was more than enough to begin.